One of the videos comes from Site. That's the logo of Site up there in the upper corner. So what this woman, the woman at the top, her name is Rita Katz. She's an Israeli Mossad agent from Iraq. She runs this little website, and her group has subscribers, and then she sends to her subscribers the video feed and the news about ISIS. So when ISIS releases a video, they release it to her, and then she releases it to BBC and CBS and NBC. And when the second American video was beheaded, her group actually released the video to her subscribers before the beheaders had released the video themselves. So before ISIS had released the video, she had released it to her subscribers. And kind of like caught with their pants down, she spoke on CNN. She said, well, in fact, within a short time after our release, ISIS account on social media indicated that within a short time, they would be releasing the video. Only we actually had the video beforehand and were able to beat them with the release. Now ask yourself, how did this little ISIS, this Israeli intelligence website, how did they have a copy of the video beforehand? As I said, the Israelis or the perpetrators always want to interpret the event for us before we have a chance to do it ourselves. And this is, this is about the Orlando massacre in the club down there. And a couple days after it happened, Netanyahu spoke, and he made like a video giving his interpretation of what was going on in Orlando. Although he's far away, he's not involved in the investigation, he said what happened. He said, this week's shooting wasn't merely an attack on the LGBT community, it was an attack on all of us, on our common values of freedom and diversity and choice. Radical Islamist terror makes no distinction between shades of infidel. This week it was gays in Orlando. A few days before it was Jews in Tel Aviv. All of us are targets. Working together, we can defeat them even faster. You see, so what Israel tries to do all the time is that their basic argument is Islamic terror affects us Israelis because we're Western. We're like you guys. And it's really you guys they hate. They're just attacking us because we're closer. So therefore, you all, Western people, have to help us because we're all in it together. That's the whole game. This is how much it's cost the American taxpayer. These are just the wars, $1.7 trillion. So the 9/11 cover-up is an essential part of the deception that enables the culprits to dupe the American public into supporting the global war on terror. So if the truth about 9/11, if the truth of the deception of 9/11 comes out, then it basically defangs the whole war. That's why they have to maintain this deception. As Richard Nixon said, it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. So the three fundamental aspects of a cover-up, a false flag cover-up. You have to control the investigation and access to the evidence, because that'll obviously show what happened. You also have to control the interpretation, how the event is explained to the public. That's where the media comes in. And you have to control the litigation, the court process, to prevent legal discovery from revealing the truth. So the first part is the controlled investigation of 9/11, or what I call the non-investigation, because you have to understand that 9/11 was never investigated. Imagine that. 3,000 people were killed in New York City, and there was no criminal investigation. You know why? Because they said, the government said, well, they attacked the Pentagon, and that's an act of war. Now, because it's an act of war, we will respond by going to war against the place where those guys came from. Well, they came from Saudi Arabia, but they were at one point in Afghanistan, so we're going to go to Afghanistan, we're going to take over Afghanistan. Now, the people that should have investigated 9/11 are these two characters here. Attorney General John Ashcroft, head of the Department of Justice, and his assistant in charge of the criminal division was this Israeli man here, Michael Chertoff. He's an Israeli-American dual national. His mother was a Mossad agent. Her name was Levia Eisen. And Michael Chertoff was given the authority for the 9/11 investigation. And as I said, for day-to-day decisions, Chertoff has the last word. And what Chertoff oversaw then was the non-investigation and the suppression of the evidence and the information, the factual information. The destruction of the evidence. The steel from the World Trade Center was taken from the World Trade Center 24/7, cut up into small pieces in New Jersey, mixed with other scrap, and sent to China for destruction. So there was no investigation. After this destruction of evidence, he was put in charge of Homeland Security, from which position he maintained his control over the evidence of 9/11. These are the people who wrote the 9/11 Commission report, because there was no investigation, and there was a clamor on the East Coast, particularly from New Jersey, places like that, for an investigation. What the government did is about 2 years later, they installed a 9/11 commission, a politically appointed commission. And they were led by a guy named Philip Zelikow, and they crafted this document called the Commission Report. But the people who worked on this report later said it was completely a hoax. 6 out of the 10 9/11 commissioners went on record saying that it was a U.S. government cover-up. This is John Farmer Jr. speaking, and he said, he was the senior counsel to the commission. He said, what government and military officials told Congress, the commission, the media, and the public about who knew what when was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. Here are two of the two co-chairmen, Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton. And Thomas Keane said, to this day, we don't know why NORAD told us what they told us. It was just so far from the truth. NORAD was the North American air defense system that was in place that day. They were doing drills that day that mimicked what happened. This is the man that wrote the myth, Philip Zelikow, and he was the executive director of the 9/11 Commission report, and he wrote the report. In March 2003, he had completed the outline of the commission report before the staff even began working. Then what he did is he just basically cherry-picked information that would support his outline. This is another man who was involved in the basic cover-up. This is Gene Corley, and he was put in charge of crafting this document, which was the building performance study, basically examining how the towers, how they held up until the point of collapse. That was as far as they went. And this man's from Chicago, and his specialty is concrete. He's actually a concrete guy. And I called him up when he was doing this examination for the document, and I said, are you testing the metal? Are you testing these steel beams for explosives? And he said, I don't know anything about that. He said, I'm not a metallurgist. So the question is, why was he put in charge of this investigation of a steel frame building if he knows nothing about steel? Well, probably for the same reason that he was put in charge of the Waco, Texas operation and Oklahoma City, because he's very good at crafting a report that will bolster the government story. Waco was a cover-up, Oklahoma City was a cover-up, 9/11 was a cover-up, Flight 800 was a cover-up. They go on and on and on. But the 9/11 cover-up is, for me, a bridge too far. When they kill 3,000 people in broad daylight and take the country to war, that's where I drew the line. They don't go. It doesn't go. Another guy who was involved in the cover-up, official cover-up, is this man here. His name is William Jeffrey, formerly Jaffe. And he oversaw NIST. He was the director of NIST when they produced this report, the final report on the collapse of the World Trade Center towers. Now, that first report went up until the point when the buildings began to collapse. Then this report was supposed to take on and explain what caused the collapse. But the problem with this report, it doesn't even look at evidence of explosives or molten metal that was found in great quantities. After he produced that report for NIST, he went on to become the CEO at an R&D, research and development organization called SRI. That stands for Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. And what SRI does, it's a nonprofit research and development organization that creates things like nanothermite for the military. And nanothermite, superthermite, is exactly what was found in the dust of the World Trade Center. So it's not like Mr. Jeffrey doesn't know about this stuff. He knows exactly how to cover it up. And it's interesting, at Stanford Research Institute, where he's the CEO, the person who oversees the laboratory where they make nanothermite is this Israeli fella here on the right, Yigal Dov Blum. And he has been the director and project manager of the laboratory where they make energetic nanocomposite materials since 1984. And another person, this is the local agent of the cover-up, this is Mayor Bloomberg, of course, with the striped tie. And Mayor Bloomberg served 12 years in New York City as the mayor, unprecedented. It was the third term. They changed the law to give him a third term. And what he did in that position is he basically suppressed 9/11 truth from coming up from the firefighters, from the first responders, or from the police department. Here he is in 2008, Christmas, visiting his good friend Ehud Barak, who was involved in something at the time called a war crime called Operation Cast Lead. And during Operation Cast Lead, the Israelis went and bombed the Gaza Strip people, the Palestinians of Gaza Strip, who are in fact basically defenseless population kept in the world's largest open-air prison. And into this open-air prison, the Israelis launched more than lead. they also launched white phosphorus, as you can see from this. And white phosphorus is, of course, an illegal banned weapon because when white phosphorus hits the human body, it just burns right through the body. You can't stop it. Water, nothing will put it out. It's a chemical reaction. And so it's banned. But the Israelis were launching these jellyfish-like artillery shells willy-nilly into the Gaza Strip during that operation. And that was Christmas. That was exactly at the period when George Bush was a lame duck president. Now, as we approach the same thing this year, be very attentive what happens when Barack Obama becomes a lame duck president and our next president is just president-elect. This is kind of like a period when it's a free fire zone because the president is no longer willing to do anything, really, and the president-elect, like Barack Obama said, he was asked about the Israeli war crimes in Gaza Strip, and he said, I'm just the president-elect right now, so it wouldn't be proper for me to speak about it right now. But he said, I'll have plenty to say when I become president. When he became president, he said nothing. Absolutely nothing. Here's Mr. Bloomberg, cuddling up with his Bibi Netanyahu friend. And here they are in New York on September 22nd, 2011, basically 10 years after 9/11, looking at the newly built memorial. And in this video, Mr. Netanyahu wanted to see the names of the 4 Israelis. He wanted to hear the stories of the 4 Israelis whose names are etched in the stone there. I would point out that of the 4,000 Israelis who were expected to have been at the World Trade Center that day or the Pentagon, only 4 died. Now, the next aspect, the aspect that's really important for us, is controlling the interpretation. The interpretation of any event that we hear about basically comes to us from the media. And in this country today, 95% of the media outlets are owned by 6 corporations. So we have a consolidation. The media is consolidated in this country like it has never been before in a so-called democratic country. The consolidation of the media in this country is more like the Soviet Union was in the Soviet times. We have 6 companies who basically give us everything that we read, see, or hear in the media. And one of the biggest, of course, is this man, Rupert Murdoch. And he was created by the Rothschilds in Australia. He was created as a media mogul down there and then sent to the United States to buy up American media properties. And I happened to have the opportunity to ski with him one day in Aspen, Colorado, when I was a ski guide. And I talked to him about his media acquisitions. What I didn't ask him, which I should have asked him, is where does the money come from? And as we now know, as I'm showing you, the money actually comes from the Rothschilds. And what the Rothschilds do is they create these media moguls in order to control public opinion. So, for example, in 2003, when the United States prepared to go into Iraq on the occupation phase, he owned 160 newspapers in this country. And every single editor of every single paper that he owned agreed that we should invade Iraq. Now, the invasion of Iraq is, of course, a massive war crime. And as the British have now determined, Tony Blair should be held accountable for war crimes. Of course. We need something like that in this country. Now, the New York Times is a family-owned paper. It's owned by the Sulzberger Ox family. And this is a family that's very closely tied to the Zionist establishment. They are one of the founding families of B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith is a Zionist Freemasonic organization, secretive, which is only open to Jewish men who are Zionist. And so the New York Times is really like B'nai B'rith.